Right now, I want to bring in my guest for this hour. From Los Angeles, California, is criminal defense attorney Silva Megerditchian. And Silva, it is great to see you again. Thanks for being on the show.
Always a pleasure, Michael. You know, I love being on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right. So, I haven't got a chance to talk to you about this particular case. So let me get your thoughts on it. This one, it has me confounded in one sense, not in terms of, if he did it or not. I think the evidence is overwhelming, but just why would this guy, had such a relatively clean background, didn't seem to have any of this type of violence in his background, and yet he goes and commits this awful, awful crime. Again, he's innocent until proven guilty, but as I said, seems to be a mountain of evidence. Love to get your thoughts.
Michael, I think that's absolutely correct. And the fact of the matter is, I think actually the defense is hanging their complete defense on that. Why would this young man stab someone he doesn't know over 100 times to the point that there wasn't even enough blood in her system when the autopsy was conducted? It's so unbelievably and ridiculously heinous that how can you put it together that this man did that? And the other issue too is, was the prosecution able to show why? Did he do this horrific crime just to sell a cell phone and use her ATM cards? I think that's what the defense is hanging their hat on, because at the end of the day, truly, that's the one aspect of this case where you're like, is this kid really this just 100% evil nutcase that just stabbed this innocent young girl who was looking forward to the rest of her life to death? That's, I think, the confusion of this case that will keep the jury up.
And, they were able to get a little bit of information in front of the jury that this is a fairly decent kid. I think an ex-girlfriend testified that he was kind and he's a nice kid, but they weren't able to put in a lot of that type of evidence. So they're really going to hang their hat on the fact that they can't place him in the car, and that they're going to think perhaps it doesn't make sense that there's no DNA found on his DNA found on the victim, all those things. But I'll tell you what, you talked about why he did it. As we know, the state doesn't have to say why. There's no need for a motive. But I think as much evidence as they've put on Silva, it almost calls for the defense to give some sort of alternative narrative. What happened here? Who was the guy? If it wasn't him, as they're saying, because there's no wounds, no defensive wounds when they were fighting, there's no DNA found, nothing on him. Who was it? Who was in the car? I think the jury wants to know that, and without that, they're going to convict.
Look, Michael, we have talked together about so many cases, and we've analyzed them so much together. And I think, and I've said this so many times before as a defense attorney, I've done so many jury trials, and I've talked to juries as we've left the courtroom for cases I've won and cases I've lost. Juries like to hear an alternate version of what could have happened that's reasonable. They want to hang their hat on some kind of theory. I do think here the defense, I think we were all shocked that they're not putting any case in chief. They're really just going to be talking about reasonable doubt. And as we said, why is not something that was answered in this trial. But we would be kidding ourselves, just as human beings in common sense. We want to know, if not him, then who? Who could have possibly done this? And also, it's a media case. This case alone puts so many safety procedures for rideshare apps because people were afraid of sending their daughters and sons into cars because of this. So, and Uber and Lyft had to identify themselves clearly, and this was part of the reason that they had to. So there's a lot that the defense has to show in closing argument. And I don't know how they're going to do that. And I don't know how they're going to have any kind of alternate story for the jury other than, look, guys, it wasn't our client.
Silva, you've been an attorney. You're a very experienced attorney. How often has the reasonable doubt argument worked? That's the Hail Mary for defense attorneys. When you've got nothing else to work with, that's where you go. How often does it really work?
Okay, Michael, I'm going to disagree on this with you because reasonable doubt is a constitutional issue for defense attorneys. I have had cases, honestly, Michael, where the jury after trial has asked the prosecutor, why did you put this case on? You guys had nothing. Reasonable doubt is essential because we don't have to prove anything. If the DAs, if the district attorneys cannot prove their case, they shouldn't even put the case on trial. So it is essential for us to have that argument. It's not a Hail Mary. Done correctly, we win our case on reasonable doubt. But in a case like this, you're absolutely correct. Where is the reasonable doubt? I don't see who could have done this except for this defendant. So in this case, you're absolutely correct. It's a Hail Mary, but done correctly, that is the cornerstone of a defense argument. You have to do your job, Mr. or Mrs. Prosecutor. I am here to make sure that the constitutional rights of my client are met. Unfortunately, in this case, it's a Hail Mary.
Yeah, fair enough, Silva. And I stand corrected. You're absolutely right. I didn't mean it that way, but I hear what you're saying. All right, we're going to take a quick break right now.
Always right.
Exactly. All right, we'll take a quick break right now. When we come back, we have a lot more ahead in this hour. We're going to take you back inside that surveillance video shown today in the mistaken rideshare murder trial. You don't want to miss that. And in our talkback segment, we want to hear from you. If the defendant in this rideshare case is guilty, what was his motive? You heard us talking about motive. Why? Why would he have done this horrible, horrible crime? Find me on social media and let me know. We'll have your comments later in this hour. And then new developments in the Scott Peterson case. The man convicted of killing his pregnant wife and their unborn child has a hearing that could get his conviction thrown out. Stay right here on Court TV. Hello and welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. The 33rd and final witness for the prosecution took the stand for the prosecution today and proved to be a key witness for the state. Justin Martin, a body cam and surveillance analyst, took the stand and showed the jury the last moment Samantha Josephson was seen on video alive. Now, Martin also showed the jury video of a black Impala, the car allegedly driven by Nathaniel Rowland, circling around the area where Samantha Josephson was waiting for her rideshare driver. The video even shows the victim trying to get into a different car before actually getting into the black Impala. Martin then led the jury moment by moment as he showed the Impala pulling up to where the victim and her entering the car. So let's take a look at some of his testimony.
Here you see a black Chevy Impala turning left into the parking lot. The white car enters the frame. The young lady comes out, throws some garbage into the trash can. You see the Impala had backed into a parking spot on the left of the frame there. Gray car, silver car, tries to pull out into traffic. It's being blocked by another car in traffic. Car comes to slows down in front of Miss Josephson. She attempts to enter it, and it pulls off.
And as she's doing that, as she's approached this silver car that ultimately pulls off after she attempted to get into it, where is the Impala during this?
The Impala is over here, still in the parking lot behind the gray minivan.
Okay. Once the Impala pulls out of the lot, which direction does it turn?
It turns right, headed south. It turns into this handicap spot right here.
What, if anything, do you observe about the Impala as it makes the turn?
It jumps the curb right here with its rear wheel and pulls into the handicap spot here. And Ms. Josephson enters the rear passenger door of the car. It puts, the car goes into reverse. You see the reverse lights. It tries to back into oncoming traffic. Oncoming traffic passes. It attempts to, again to back into traffic. continue southward on Hardin Street. You see the black Impala pulling back out into traffic shortly, and it jumps its rear passenger tire on the curb. Enters the handicap parking spot. Ms. Josephson enters the rear passenger door. Closes the door. The driver attempts to back into Hardin Street with oncoming traffic. Again, pulling out into the right lane and then headed south on Hardin Street.
All right, still with me is criminal defense attorney Silva Megerditchian. Now, Silva, as I look at the video, I ask myself, why did the prosecution decide to end with this? It's certainly powerful. It's the last time you see her alive, you see her getting into a car. But it doesn't advance the theory that it's him actually driving the car. You can't see him. We know it's his car, and they've done the best they can to connect him to the car. But at the end of the day, it doesn't show that. Why do you think the prosecution decided to end with this particular testimony?
You know, Michael, I think it's exactly what you said to start the segment. It's powerful. And you are seeing the last moments of this young woman's life. I think that alone is extremely significant to end. And also just shows, I think, the car going on top of the curb. It shows that the driver is nervous. It shows that, there are issues that the prosecutor believes in their closing argument that this is someone who was ready to kill. And although it doesn't show the actual driver, again, I feel like it's part of their narrative that you don't have to see the driver. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And that is a reasonable inference. So I do think it just goes to video really speaks 1,000 words. And the video is gut-wrenching because, just as people watching, you were begging her not to go into that car. And I think it was extremely effective of the prosecution to use it in that way.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you because I think one of the things that they've focused on a couple of different times is the fact that he circled the block, and they showed that during his testimony. Circled the block, I believe it was 4 times. And they even characterized it, which I would have objected to, but the defense didn't, as a shark circling or looking for its prey. That's a characterization I would not have allowed them to get away with. But it's an image that suggests this is a guy that was premeditating this murder. I think that advances their theory in that sense.
I agree fully. And Michael, I think the car jumping the curb is huge too. She was killed over 100 times, stabbed in a frenzy. Almost the car is driving in a frenzy. It's almost like an excitement of a kill. And I wonder if the DA the district attorney, the prosecutor can actually use that to say, look, this might have been someone with a very limited, if any, criminal history, but this was a kill. And you're absolutely right, too. I think it was extremely tragic and a missed opportunity by the defense. That metaphor, that inference of a shark circling, of a predator hunting, of an innocent young woman entering the wrong car is such a powerful story. And it's really, again, I always say when I do my jury trials, you want to leave the jury with a very powerful image because that image will keep them up at night, whether it's your client's innocence or guilt. I think this is the imagery that's going to keep the jurors up. And this is the imagery that's going to return a very fast verdict of guilty unless the public defender has something, or the defense attorney has something out of their hat that we just haven't seen.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that that's the case. And you're 100% right, Silva. The one thing, if you ask me, what I remember from this case, it's that characterization of him circling like a shark looking for prey. Right now, I want to play the cross-examination of this particular witness, Justin Martin, to see what the defense did with him. And the fact that they ended with a very interesting question, which I think was the right way to end it. We'll talk about it right after this. Let's take a listen.
Cross-examination.
Please, Court, Your Honor.
Yes.
Hi, Ms. Martin. So right before we broke, Mr. Goldberg asked you With that last video that you played with Ms. Josephson getting into the vehicle, that was the last time that she was seen on video, correct?
Out of all the video that I reviewed, that is the last time that she is in frame.
Okay. And you spent a lot of time with these videos, is that fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
When did you create that PowerPoint?
Over the course of the past 3 weeks.
Okay. Do you recall when you handed it over to the solicitors?
I gave them a copy of it about 2 weeks ago, and then I made some adjustments as I continued to review more video just recently today.
Now, you mentioned a few times when speaking with Mr. Goldberg that you were able to do, your kind of, clip making and your analysis based on the videos that you were provided.
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
You were only given one video box from Saluda Avenue, right?
Yes, there's one video box at the intersection of Divine Street and Saluda that I received video from.
Okay, you didn't get the second one that was farther up near the parking lot?
I did not on Saluda Avenue.
Okay. And with all the videos that you reviewed, never once did you see Nathaniel Rowland?
I could not make out or identify the person driving the vehicle, no.
Okay, so you never see Nathaniel Rowland, correct?
Not in the video.
Silva, very effective cross-examination, pointing out how thorough he was, but even with all that thoroughness, he could not place the defendant in the car.
And Michael, that's, for a lot of defense attorneys, that's enough. That's enough to really have a huge argument. But that's if you don't have other evidence. I just feel that the evidence is so overwhelming that the defense had to answer those questions, and they just don't. Especially the ex-girlfriend's testimony that you played earlier, cleaning of the car, wearing the surgical gloves, the fact that she was able to identify the weapon used, that he had it in his possession before. As a defense attorney, you cringe because you want answers to those because, again, at the end of the day, the jury is going to have the same common sense questions. And where is that reasonable doubt? There is doubt here, but is it reasonable? And I think the prosecutor goes over and beyond to show the doubt we may have is just not reasonable. It's not supported by actual evidence.
No question about it. It's not beyond a shadow of a doubt. There may be a tiny glimmer of a doubt, but it has to be reasonable, and I just don't think it's there. All right, Silva, stand by. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we're going to switch gears to another story. Convicted murderer Scott Peterson is trying to get his conviction thrown out. We'll get you up to speed on why his attorneys say he deserves a new trial right here on Court TV, so keep it where it is. New developments in the Scott Peterson murder case could end up getting him a new trial for the killing of his pregnant wife, Lacey. And that is the focus of our Court TV close-up. In just a few weeks, on August 25th, the judge has ordered a status hearing on his case on whether there was juror misconduct in his 2004 trial. This comes after the California Supreme Court overturned his death penalty sentence. Court TV's Ted Rowland has the background on how Peterson's death penalty was overturned.
In a unanimous opinion, the California Supreme Court reversed the death sentence against Scott Peterson, saying the trial court made a series of clear and significant errors in jury selection. At issue is the fact that several potential jurors were dismissed solely because they wrote on questionnaires that they were against the death penalty, even though the jurors gave no indication that their views would prevent them from following the law. The court, however, rejected Peterson's claim that he did not receive a fair trial and affirmed his convictions for murder. Scott Peterson was found guilty of murdering his pregnant wife, Lacey, and their unborn son, Connor, in 2003. The case received unprecedented media attention, which Peterson's appellate attorney, Cliff Garner, argued should have resulted in a second change of venue.
Of the nearly 50% that had reached a decision, 98.5% thought he was guilty, and 6 jurors thought he was innocent. Out of the 1,000 that had completed questionnaires at the time the change of venue motion was raised.
The Supreme Court rejected that argument, saying the publicity the Peterson trial generated, like the trials of O.J. Simpson and the Manson family and any other number of so-called trials of the century before them, was intrinsic to the case, not the place. Therefore, the court found that moving the trial to another location a second time would not have solved the problem of excessive publicity. Peterson's other arguments, that jurors should not have been able to stand in his boat during jury deliberations and that cadaver dog evidence was flawed, were also rejected by the court. It's now up to local prosecutors as to whether or not they will retry the penalty phase. California has not carried out a death sentence since 2006 and currently has a moratorium on executions.
All right, now coming up in August, if the judge finds that there was juror misconduct in the guilt phase of his trial, Peterson's conviction of murder could also be thrown out. Now, the specific juror in question is Rochelle Neese. Peterson's attorneys are arguing that she falsely answered questions during jury selection about being the victim of a crime of domestic violence and the subject of a restraining order, both while pregnant with 2 different kids, for the purpose of getting on this jury and then punishing Scott Peterson for his murdering of his pregnant wife. Now, prosecutors have said that the questionnaire asked if she had ever been a party to a lawsuit and that the juror didn't understand that a restraining order was a type of lawsuit. All right, I want to bring in a very special guest right now. Joining me now from Westport, Connecticut is lawyer and former Court TV producer and author of a new book titled Premonition, Wendy Whitman. Wendy, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Wendy is a very good friend of mine. We were at the original Court TV at the very beginning. I believe there's a 30-year anniversary right around the corner. You and I have been involved for a very long time, so I'm glad for you to be on the show. But what I want you to do is, Scott Peterson was one of those cases at Court TV that really helped put Court TV on the map. There were a few, we can point them out. But Scott Peterson was a big case for Court TV. Put in perspective for our viewers how big and how hated this guy was.
Well, I always say there's no finality in the legal system. And once you get a guilty verdict, particularly in a death penalty case, the proceedings just get going because you have automatic appeals and things like that. And I think by the time, in a high profile case like this, by the time they even began jury selection, Scott Peterson was like the most hated man in America. And a lot of it was just attached to his behavior that different things kept coming out about him after Lacey went missing. They found out about his girlfriend, Amber Fry, and, he was laughing and smiling at the vigil for his missing wife and unborn child. And, the jurors after the verdict said that his lack of emotion and the way he behaved with Amber Fry when Lacey was still missing, and it took 4 months to find their remains, obviously rubbed them the wrong way. So I think the case was largely circumstantial, but his cumulative behavior, people just felt that he was guilty. So for Court TV, it just blew up. I think that, for every Lacey Peterson, that picture, I think everyone remembers of her smiling just caught everyone's heart. And I think, Scott Peterson was considered very good looking, and the whole combination, it just blew up in the media. And I always say for every Lacey Peterson, unfortunately, there are many women who are murdered by their boyfriends or their husbands or spouses that no one ever hears about. But for various reasons, Lacey Peterson's murder just blew up in the news, and it just had a snowball effect, and it became a huge Court TV case.
Yeah, an incredibly sad story. And as you said, it was a circumstantial case. This wasn't the strongest case, and there was, a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, they really didn't even know where the murder happened.
Exactly. I think it's one of the few cases we've had where they really never had a crime scene. And the only concrete piece of evidence I remember from the case is they found one of Lacey's hairs stuck to a pliers in Scott Peterson's boat. So she was his wife. Was that enough to convict him? I think, as I said, it was largely circumstantial. And again, the likability of even the lawyers in cases, the defendant, the victim, does affect the jury. And Scott Peterson was like the devil, and Lacey Peterson was the angel. And, the jury can come back with any verdict they want, and they clearly, found him guilty. So who would have thought more than 15 years later, there's a chance he'll get a retrial. Whether juror number 7, at the time she was nicknamed Strawberry Shortcake, whether she intentionally did not reveal that or it was a misstep on her part, is who's to say. But obviously, most people would assume in jury selection of a murdered pregnant woman, if you had any kind of domestic violence situation at all, you would certainly bring it to light.
And Wendy, covering so many of these trials, it's not that difficult to tell when somebody really wants to get on a jury.
Absolutely. Like we covered Casey Anthony. I was actually on Nancy Grace's headline HLN show during that, and I watched every minute of jury selection, which was just fascinating. And you could tell which people were desperately trying to not be sat on the jury and which people were desperately trying to be sat on the jury. And unfortunately, high-profile cases have extra layers of problems in seating a jury, because generally speaking, by the time the case even gets to jury selection, a lot of evidence has come out, different stories and information has come out, and it's almost impossible to get an impartial jury, I think, in some of these cases. And it is hard to screen out people who are trying to get their 15 minutes of fame potentially. Jurors get book deals, all kinds of things. So, I think it is a big challenge to get a really rock solid jury in a high profile case.
All right. Speaking of book deals, Wendy, quickly, I only have a little time left.
Okay.
Tell us about your
Sure.
book. It's something that I'm sure true crime fans will love, even though it's not specifically true crime, based in a lot of experience that is basically true.
Sure. So my book is called Premonition. It's a crime thriller. It's fiction. But I did something unique. I incorporated 20 true cases that I had come across over my 20 years of covering trials. And I think it makes it a very unique book. And I think it's a very good combination for true crime fans, because it's a very entertaining crime thriller. But I also incorporate 20 true cases through the protagonist's thoughts and things like that. So I think for anyone interested in crime, they'll find it a very cool mixture of an entertaining fictional crime thriller with true crime cases throughout it.
Awesome. It's an awesome read, folks. So if you get the opportunity, pick it up. It's Premonition by Wendy Whitman. Wendy, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I truly appreciate it. Great to see you as always.
It's great to see you, Michael. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. You have a wonderful night. All right. We're going to take a break now. It's almost time for our Talk Back segment. Every day, I ask a question on social media, and today's question is about the mistaken rideshare murder case. Here it is. If the defendant committed this crime, this terrible, terrible crime, what was the motive? We'll have some of your answers right after this break, so keep it right here on Court TV. It is time for today's Talkback segment, and each day we post a question on Court TV's social media pages. We gather your comments and questions and respond right here on the show. Today, the state and defense have rested their case in chief in the trial of Nathaniel Rowland. Now, a lot of evidence has been put forth for this jury, but none of it really explains what a possible motive. Now, remember, prosecutions, they don't have to prove that. They don't have to supply a motive to the jury. But we decided to ask you today's question, and that is, if the defendant committed this horrible crime, what was the motive? Still with me is criminal defense attorney Silva Megerditchian, and also joining us again is Court TV legal correspondent Shanley Painter. All right, let's get to our first comment, and it is from Mary Sunshine. Mary says, the usual theory is that the more wounds, the more personal the connection. Not in this case at all. I think this shows definite hatred for women. And Shanley, I'm going to start with you, and then Silva, I want to get your thoughts. This is absolutely one of those types of killings where you expect there to be a personal connection. There's just, it's very personal. Anytime you stab someone, it's very up close and personal. To do it that many times, it almost feels like a crime of passion. But again, there's no evidence at all of that.
Right, Michael. Typically on cases we cover here at Court TV where someone is stabbed, that's a personal crime up close. And for 120 times, there's some connection. They know each other. Here, there's no evidence put before this jury that Nathaniel Rowland knew who Samantha Josephson was, or she knew him at the time. And like you said, they don't have to prove a motive. We would expect that they're probably going to argue one tomorrow to wrap all this up in closing arguments. In the opening, they did say that he had his eyes fixed solely on her. They ended their case in chief with the video of him basically stalking the 5 Points area looking for some sort of victim, possibly robbery, since he did try to use the ATM and of course tried to sell her cell phone the very next morning.
Silva, love to get you to ring in on this.
Absolutely, Michael, and Chanley is right on this. Absolutely. When there's a personal connection, you see this type of violence. And the viewer is absolutely correct in her contention about maybe there's an underlying hatred for women. The first thing I thought about, maybe he was stalking her because he was so attracted to her. She goes in the vehicle, realizes he's not the driver, and there's some kind of rejection there, and he loses his mind. I mean, that's the first thought I went to, because other than that, the only argument is this just evil, where we see serial killers who start off, being a little bit sloppy in their killings, and there's really no motive, just this underlying kind of underneath evil of hatred. I think the points are extremely valid, and that is the biggest mystery that's going to keep this jury discussing this in the jury room.
Yeah, it is certainly a mystery, no question about it. Our next comment is from Barbara Roberts. She says, could have been several reasons: rape, robbery, human trafficking, but whatever, something went wrong and she died. Or maybe it was just a hate crime. Justice for Samantha. And Silva, I mean, that could be possible. Maybe it could be a hate crime. Maybe it was a black-white thing. At some point, I felt like maybe we might hear some testimony that they knew each other somehow from somewhere. But again, that just never materialized.
Just as a human being, Michael, we want to have the story. We want to be able to make sense of something so unbelievably tragic. And my first thought was, too, maybe he didn't want to kill her. Maybe this was just someone who was rejected. And we saw this kind of in the Bahena trial, where it was the same kind of randomness, where you cannot understand the underlying reasons why a young man would want to kill anybody. The problem is, when the client doesn't testify, our minds are going to jump to any kind of story to make sense of it.
Chanley, and just by looking at his countenance in the courtroom, he just seems to be a guy who has connected with people, that he's a nice person.
Absolutely, and he has rows of family and friends there to support him every day, who stand by him, who've spoken out on his behalf, believe in him and his innocence, as does his defense team there. And so, yeah, he comes across as, I look at him like, how could he do such a crime as this, Michael?
All right, well, it will end up in the jury tomorrow, closing arguments. Thank you to Silva. Thank you for Chanley Painter for being with me as well. I'm Michael Ayala. It has been a pleasure being with you. Coming up next in closing arguments, Vinnie Politan takes a look at the biggest moments in the mistaken rideshare murder trial in closing arguments. So keep it right here on Court TV.